Welcome to another episode of Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. I'm the host, of course, of Cal's Corner Radio Show, so welcome. And the executive producer of the show is, of course, Rob McConnell. Folks, as those of you who listen to the show regularly every week here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. And it's nice tonight to talk about something we haven't spoken about before, which is the idea that there might be life on Mars. There's an exciting new discovery from NASA where they have announced, apparently, the discovery of organic molecules on the red planet. And that, of course, is very exciting. Now, before we get back to that, let's talk about the issue of life throughout the universe in general and explain, and, in my opinion, prove by process of logic that it must indeed exist other than in locations on planet Earth. Let me explain why. The universe, of course, is quite old. It's, according to scientists, several billion years old. It might be anywhere from 10 to 12 billion years old. So depending on what measurement or age you believe, there's no denying that there are countless, as in literally infinite worlds out there. What I mean is this: there are at least 100 billion known galaxies. Each galaxy has anywhere from 150 to 300 billion stars in it. You can do the math, multiply the two values, and you come up with an incredible number of stars. Most of these stars probably have planets orbiting them, and then, of course, of those planets, a subset of them are in what we call the habitable zone, that is the Goldilocks zone. That is a distance that is far enough and stable enough for life to have evolved theoretically on a planet. The theoretical star with the planets orbiting it. Some of them are going to be huge. Some of them are going to be too close to the star. Others are going to be too far away so that they never develop the warmth and temperature to develop life as we know it. Others are going to be just perfect. In fact, one can easily Google on the internet the terms alien Earths or other Earths, and you will find that scientists have already found many of them. So scientists have found literally thousands of other planets out there so far. We know that the number is obviously in the trillions. So from that standpoint alone, one can argue that life must exist elsewhere. And here's why. The human race, or any life form as far as we know it, anything cannot be an exception to the laws of the universe. They're universal. Things like gravity, things like water, things like how electrons and protons and neutrons attract or repel one another. These are basically universal constants as far as we know. They're at least predictable enough that they allow us to invent and use what's called technology. If the laws of physics were not predictable or we did not understand them to the degree that we do, we wouldn't be able to make computers, aircraft, high technology, wonderful things like that. We wouldn't even be able to make basic medicines because we wouldn't understand the causal relationships biochemically that exist between various elements in nature. So let's look at the issue of life on Earth. Let's assume, for the sake of this discussion, that there is no other life anywhere in the universe, and that the life that exists on Earth is limited only to Earth and has occurred nowhere else. That doesn't make any logical sense. In other words, human beings, regardless of what you think of them or regardless of what your beliefs are, must live and kowtow to the laws of physics. We're born one day, we die one day. Nobody lives forever, despite what people have claimed in the past or may still claim today. There's no evidence, for example, that there's even reincarnation. But even if there is reincarnation, the point is when you die, you die. If you do reincarnate, you come back as somebody else, but you're still not the same person you were. But there is no evidence that there is reincarnation. But there is evidence that people die, and that's it. We know of no evidence that anything else continues. That's not to say it doesn't. We just don't have that data. What we do know is that we are subject to the limits of the laws of physics. Human beings cannot fly without the help of an artificial device, such as an aircraft, whereas a bee does it in the normal nature of things. So if we look at the issue of life, we know for a fact that life is quite old on Earth. that human beings as a species came late in the evolution and development of life. Insects and fish and other type creatures are far older than mammals and human beings. So since life does exist on the earth, and assuming that this life magically created itself, that there's no God involved, that life is just the natural consequence of having the right combinations of all this wonderful stuff line up properly, like the proper temperature, the proper stability on a planet, the proper biochemical compositors. Let's assume that all this just happened to line itself up just perfectly. The first life evolved on Earth. It eventually, over time, went through different phases, including dinosaurs, and now, of course, we have people. Well, as incredible and as astronomical as the odds are that this would happen, all by itself, without help from some divine creator or a group of aliens trying to bioengineer something, for lack of a better term, as incredible as those odds would be, because of the number of other worlds out there in the universe, which again is practically unlimited. It is in the trillions. If what happened on Earth was just one of those things, this so-called one of those things would have had to have happened billions of times over throughout the universe, making that what happened on Earth not to be an exception, but not necessarily the rule either, but to be a common enough occurrence to have it predictable at some point. It might be one every billion planets. It might be one every 2 billion. It might be one every 20 billion. We don't know, because we haven't discovered enough about our own universe to figure that kind of math out. But the point is, if you assume that there is no God, that there is no creator, and that life magically somehow manages to structure and create itself, then what happened on Earth, by coincidence or just one of those things, had to have happened so far countless times over, especially over billions of years of time, since we know that our own sun is not exactly an ancient sun. It is kind of middle-aged. It's about, the Earth is almost 5 billion years old, so it's kind of middle-aged, if you will. So there's a whole lot of time for things to have happened before whatever happened on Earth, and of course there will be after the Earth is no longer here. The universe is constantly recycling itself. So life must exist from the logical viewpoint that if it is just the logical consequence of the right set of circumstances lining themselves up properly so that life can happen, it had to have occurred many times throughout history, throughout our galaxy, the Earth being one example. Or if you believe that God created all of this stuff, well, you're forced with a theoretical choice here, if you will, a decision you have to make. Either you believe that God created life only on the Earth and this entire universe for whatever other reason, or maybe God created life throughout the universe and Earth is just one example. And if you believe that and you're a Christian, does that mean that Jesus Christ planet hops and dies for every alien's sins? Who knows? There's no way to know that stuff. But it is exciting that at least on the planet Mars, one of our nearby planets, of course, next to Earth, there has been apparently now organic molecules found. That isn't quite proof of life, although they have detected methane signatures, which are usually indicative of life. This is an important first step. And, of course, NASA will be continuing to explore this to try to nail down and understand exactly what is going on, what would cause the existence of these organic molecules, and to answer the ultimate question of whether life ever existed on Mars. Now, let's say that they do find out sometime in the next year or two, now that they have found these organic molecules. Let's say that further testing proves that they are, in fact, ancient life forms. The very next step will be to try to get a DNA analysis, if possible, of this so-called Martian extraterrestrial life. Now, if it is possible to extract DNA from it and analyze it, it will be very interesting to see if that DNA matches anything on Earth. If it does match what is on Earth, then it is likely, or one can argue reasonably, logically if you will, that life on Earth at least may actually be Martian in origin, because whatever happened on Mars probably happened further back in time than what happened on Earth. And you might say, well, that's almost impossible. How can life on Earth be Martian in origin? I'm not saying that that has been proven. I'm simply saying that if there is a common DNA fingerprint, there cannot be two origins for this life. There can only be one of them. And we already know from scientists roaming around in the Antarctic and exploring the South Pole, we already have found meteorites from the planet Mars. You can see them in museums. You can look at images of them on the internet. They have been found, and they did find their way to Antarctica. And of course, there is that famous rock that is from Mars that some scientists believe contains the fossilized remains of very primitive bacteria life that existed once on Mars. That has yet to be definitively proven, although the statement was made and the conclusion was made many years ago, but it still is in dispute. But one thing that seems not to be in dispute is this latest finding that apparently organic molecules have now been found on Mars, so the race is on by scientists to determine exactly what that means. We'll be back after this commercial break.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV. Plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
We live in rapidly shifting times of extreme volatility and uncertainty. Such profound change brings a unique opportunity for the evolution of consciousness. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio Show, a program that explores the latest scientific developments and deepening spiritual truths supporting human evolution. Join me on xzbn.net, where I interview leading experts in science, physics, medicine, spirituality, and more. By applying divergent viewpoints to leading-edge topics, we uncover expansive and evolutionary truth to assist you on your path to enlightenment. More information and past episodes are available at missionevolution.org.
Welcome back to the second segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. So, folks, we were talking about the issue of organic molecules now having been found on the planet Mars. Scientists are going to further pursue this to conclusively identify whether this the presence of organic molecules proves that there used to be life on Mars, or whether the result of these organic molecules are somehow caused by another process. Either way, regardless of what the outcome is, it's going to be exciting, especially if it turns or points to the issue of life. We also discussed why it is that life must exist elsewhere throughout the universe. The short version or explanation of that is that the human race or any life form cannot be an exception to the rules of physics or the laws of science. Therefore, if life exists here and it created itself rather than was created as some sort of project by, say, some sort of God or divine being, then, of course, this random thing happening here must have occurred many times throughout the universe because, again, the Earth cannot be an exception to the laws of physics. It had to have occurred many times over. Now, I want to switch to something a little bit different, but it's sort of related, and this one's a bit of a mind bender. And I ask that you think about this through for just a moment, because in my discussions over the years with people about this around the world, people understand it, but they don't seem to spend a lot of time thinking about it, which I think is unfortunate. All right, let's back up a little bit here. Now, for those of you who have a basic science education, we know that time goes forward. Time can also go backwards. There are particles that travel backwards in time, such as tachyons, for example. But time, for all practical purposes, especially where people is concerned, goes only one direction, forward. In other words, when you wake up tomorrow, you're not going to be younger. You're going to be another day older. And one day, of course, you will die. Now, according to scientists, the Earth is about 4.6 to 4.8 billion years old. And when they say billion years, they simply mean years, like in the normal chronology of time that you and I would imagine. But when you get to certain religious texts, such as the Bible, you have claims in there that the Earth is only 6 days, it was created in 6 days, and that God rested on the seventh. Now, a day, as we understand it, is 24 hours, but yet science says the Earth is billions of years old. So which one is correct? Is the Bible correct, where it says the Earth was created in 6 days, as in 6 24-hour days? That's what it implies, at least based on translations from the original languages into English and other, languages. Or is it that it could not have been created in that period of time and that the Bible is wrong? You know, we ultimately don't know because no one was there to witness it. No one was there to document it. And there is a theory that will please probably both religious types who want to believe that the Earth was created literally in 6 days, as well as scientists who want to believe or say we know better that it was created over a long period of time, specifically billions of years. Now, what this new theory, it's actually not new, it's actually decades old, was actually being championed by the Russian physics community, largely at one point until events of World War II interfered with that process. But basically it has to do with the speed of light. Now, we know that the speed of light, the term called 1 light year, is the distance that light travels over time in a period of 1 year. It's about 6 trillion miles. Therefore, if a star is 4 light years away, that means at the speed of light, it would take 4 Earth years to get there for that light or an object or a spaceship to reach that star. If a star is 10 light years away, it's going to take 10 years at the speed of light to reach that star. Obviously, if you go slower, it's going to take you a longer period of time. So we know that the speed of light is roughly 186,272.9 miles per second. Depends on who you ask, but it's roughly 186,000 miles per second. And we know that over a certain distance, we can then do a simple calculation to figure out how many light years, light weeks, or light days a event is. Okay, if the sun right now, God forbid, were to blow up on Earth, we're about 8 light minutes away from anything that happens real time on the sun. So if the sun blew up, we wouldn't know it on Earth for another 8 minutes, because it would take that long for the light to reach us at the speed of light, the distance from the sun to the Earth. Okay? Now, here's where this gets interesting. Scientists claim that they have basically proven what is generically called the Big Bang Theory. The short version of the Big Bang Theory is that the matter in the universe was all basically part of one entity. It then kept condensing and condensing to the point where at the atomic level it pushed back. It exploded. This enormous explosion essentially created the so-called universe, the Bang, and the universe has been expanding ever since and cooling off. Okay? We can see that in the infrared scans of the universe that it is, or seems to be at least, cooling down. It also seems to be expanding. Well, what would expand it? Something that must have pushed it outward, which scientists believe was the Big Bang. Now, the reason that scientists claim that the Earth is billions of years old is because the current measurement for the speed of light is then projected using a theory or a belief set called uniformitarianism. That is the belief that things that happen at the current rate happen at a uniform rate, or they always happened at this rate in time in the past. And I have to emphasize here that it is an assumption. It is not something that is automatically proven with everything that goes on out there. So the assumption is that where it concerns the speed of light today, that if something is 186,000 miles a second, which is the speed of light, this is the speed of light as it has also been in the past as well. And because we can measure the decay rate of elements in rocks and various minerals and entities in the earth, we can then do calculations to say, oh, this piece of stone is X number of million or billion of years old based on the decay rate at the current speed of rate, blah, blah, blah. We can actually date it. Now, here's the thing. According to Russian physicists, and they're not the only ones, when they have measured the speed of light in the past, they have noted that at times it seems to have been faster than at other times when they measure it. In other words, there's several experiments that have been done over the years. We've been able to measure the speed of light for a little over 100 years now in using various means around the world. It has been measured repeatedly, and you will notice that in many of the studies, the measurement comes up slightly differently. It never comes up the same way twice, so to speak. And the variations are different enough to where one has to wonder, is this just an error in the methods that are being used, or is something else going on? Is the speed of light, for example, not so much a constant, but maybe it's roughly a ballpark figure that one can more or less depend on, but it is not an absolute, just like Einstein had predicted that the speed of light was absolute and that nothing could ever exceed the speed of light. Other modern physicists, especially those who study quantum physicists, disagree with Einstein, but they have yet to disprove him wrong. Well, let me throw this idea by you. Imagine if the speed of light were even faster in the past than it is today. Now think about that for a moment. Imagine the speed of light, whose current rate is roughly 186,000 miles per second. Imagine if it were 200,000 miles a second. Or imagine if it were double. Imagine if it were 1,000,000 miles a second. Put any number in there that you want to work with here, whatever makes you comfortable, but make sure that that number is faster than 186,000 miles per second, which is what it is today. Well, what would happen to our so-called calculations projecting the age of the universe if we were to use values that were faster for the speed of light than they exist today? What would the result of those calculations be? Well, the short version is that it would show that the universe is actually much younger. In other words, everything would have happened a lot faster than we think it happened today. In other words, instead of something occurring over billions of years, 10 or 12 billion, it could have occurred in millions, or depending on what value you want to put in there, hundreds of thousands or even thousands. Now, that fact, that interesting dynamic that one would change in this theoretical exercise, the ramifications of it are very profound. because one of the key tenets of the Big Bang is that everything was pretty much one piece that blew up. The amount of energy that would have been released in that initial explosion could not have been greater than anything, or was absolutely greater than anything today, because everything has since spread out and has split apart. But what if the initial speed of light, the initial Big Bang, produced a rate of the speed of light that was much faster than what we can see today? The consequence of that would mislead scientists into thinking that the universe is much older than it really is, and that things occurred over a much longer period of time than they really did. Again, the implications of this, if one can get their mind around the logic here, are incalculably infinite. They change things. Things would appear to be millions of years old when they're not even close to that age. So the question now becomes, when we date things today, are we dating them ultimately, meaning they really are 10 million-year-old dinosaurs or 300 million-year-old dinosaurs? Or is it that we're just using the modern decay rate or rate of the speed of light as we know it today, and based on those existing measurements today, we think it's this old, but in the past, it may actually be younger? We don't know. We'll be back after this break.
Broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond. You're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Demo.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world, interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is once again Rob McConnell. So in the first segment, we talked about the fact that scientists, according to NASA, have discovered what seem to be organic molecules on the presence of Mars. That's exciting, especially if further study of these organic molecules prove that their existence is from ancient life that used to exist or may still exist on the red planet. Then we talked about a real mind bender, which is the idea that the speed of light in the past may have been much faster than it is today. The ramifications of that is that the universe would be actually much younger than scientists believe it is today, because back then when the speed of light was much faster, things were occurring at a much faster rate. Therefore, if we look at them today in retrospect using today's measurable value of the speed of light, things would appear to be much older than they really are. And of course, the ramifications of that are absolutely mind-bending. So that's enough regarding our news and updates regarding space. One thing I'd like to say as we close out that subject and switch to another topic, it's a very exciting time right now in the aerospace and space exploration industry. You have, of course, companies like SpaceX and Amazon's Blue Horizon, where they're pioneering new efforts to use reusable vehicles, rockets, which can be brought back down to Earth and reused. That, of course, lowers the cost of space travel. But also with planets like Mars on the horizon being explored in the near future, with countries like China and Russia and the United States and even Japan all claiming that they're going to try to colonize the moon. This is a very exciting time period to be alive and see this happen, because it's going to happen sooner than later. I'll tell you, I don't know how you feel about this, but when I was a young kid growing up with the original Star Trek series, the Cold War, of course, was racing at the time. And I remember having many discussions with my dad about space, because I've always been interested in space exploration and aerospace in general, to the point where I actually earned a living in that industry, where I worked for the Boeing company for a couple of years before I moved to Europe. And spent about half my time matrix to defense and space issues, as well as commercial aircraft, while working for the Boeing company. And one of the things that always used to bother me as a young boy was when the Cold War ended, the space program basically died up, or after the Americans landed on the moon and beat the Russians to it, we then put the brakes on the space program instead of continuing like we should have, where by now, if we had continued at the pace of the Apollo race, we could have been ready to perhaps leave the solar system by now. But instead, because we beat the Russians in the Cold War and beat them in the space race, all of a sudden we backed down. And I've always disagreed with that. I think that one should have pursued these driven by science first and foremost. And if you do it right, the military implications and all that other fun stuff will eventually take care of themselves. But it is an exciting time to be alive right now, because we're on the cusp of some next generation developments, as well as the way that aircraft are made. Not only is there a increased use in composite materials and doing things by molding instead of welding things together, but also the type of engines that are being used. Hypersonic transport is becoming more and more mainstream, and supersonic transport is even making a comeback at the commercial level. The old Concorde supersonic transport jets, you may remember those from decades ago. Well, they're making a comeback in the form of a whole new class of airplane that will actually achieve the same thing. They will fly at supersonic speeds, transporting people across the oceans in a matter of hours. And, of course, they'll be generating those sonic booms well over the oceans, but you won't hear them on land. But the point is, people will be able to get around from point A to Z very shortly using ever faster transportation, as well as alternative means of transportation, as epitomized by companies like the Boring Company, which, of course, is owned by the entrepreneur Elon Musk. So let's talk about things that are happening now down on Earth. Internationally, there's some exciting stuff going on because you have this summit coming up between the G powers. And in this case, you have a clash that is coming. You have basically bureaucrats in Europe and the leaders of Europe on one side in what we will call the G7 alliance. And of course, they are upset over Donald Trump's America First policy. And this is predictable. If the European Union were to say, put the EU first, that would bother other countries that are not part of Europe. Whenever America says America first, that always bothers every other nation, including our European allies, even if the interests are the same. But what seems to be at issue this time around are things like trade tariffs. Trump, of course, has started imposing tariffs against Chinese goods, against steel made in Europe, in order to protect, at least he claims, American markets. Now, he has the backing of the lobbyists in the United States, but internationally, of course, he's being condemned for this. Now, we have to take some of this condemnation with a grain of salt because there's an uneven standard here. Now, one of the biggest criticisms of the EU is that it doesn't play fair. And let's give one very real example here. Let's talk about Airbus, the aerospace conglomerate giant that is run by the EU. The entity, of course, is a rival to the American aerospace giant Boeing. So Airbus Industries is a rival to Boeing, and so what happens is because Airbus is owned and subsidized by a couple of different countries, including France and Germany, there's a fine line to walk between what are government subsidies and, say, tax breaks given by a country to help a company compete. Okay, and one of the big criticisms of Boeing versus Airbus is that the Europeans benefit from what would be illegal under World Trade Organization policies, subsidies from the countries such as France and Germany, whereas Boeing doesn't get those subsidies from the United States government. It is not owned by the U.S. government. It is instead a publicly held company, and it doesn't really rely on funding in the same way that Airbus does. Now, in the past, there have been contentious issues in bids for aircraft placed over this. And what Trump is trying to do is walk a fine line where he's trying to protect the American steel industry, for example, as well as from unfair trade practices by China, while he's also trying to move American business forward. He does understand that Americans must be competitive to a point, otherwise nobody's going to buy American-made products, and that's not going to help anything either. So, for example, look at Trump's negotiations with NAFTA regarding Canada and Mexico. I will tell you in my reporting on Donald Trump, he doesn't exactly have a love for Mexico. On the other hand, he's enough of a businessman to understand that Mexico does provide a vital suite of economic services that, of course, help American companies and do help create American jobs, even though illegal aliens are doing some of that work. The same is true for Canada. Canada does benefit from NAFTA. NAFTA benefits from Canada's participation in NAFTA. But what Trump seems to want to do is to renegotiate some of the terms of this and make it more fair for America. Specifically, his target seems to be Mexico more so than Canada, because a lot of companies, after NAFTA became law, and NAFTA became law during the presidency of Bill Clinton, we must remember that, it did not produce this windfall of American jobs that Clinton and Al Gore had promised. In fact, even Hillary Clinton admitted during the presidential campaign in 2016, when she was competing against Donald Trump for the White House, that NAFTA had not delivered the kind of promises or potential that they had hoped that it would. Well, as Trump was right to point out, it never was intended to do that. It actually was a sop to globalists, and that is a fact. The Clintons and the Democratic Party are the ones that pushed the global elitist agenda, and it later came back to bite them all these years later because Donald Trump is in the White House and not Hillary Clinton. And if most Americans agreed with the globalist elitist agenda of the Democrats, Clinton would have won the election handily rather than suffering a narrow defeat, despite winning the majority of the votes. That's how ironic the election was. So now you have these world leaders getting together for their summit. They're going to talk about things, try to hash things out. And at the end of the day, nothing's going to change. Europe is going to keep the position they have. They're going to try to stay united against Trump on the issue of tariffs. They're against American tariffs. And, of course, Trump will stick to his guns and try to please his installed base, voter base, of trying to push America first. And what is interesting is that world leaders get criticized by other countries for pushing their country first. Yet that is the job of a leader of a country to do that. Russia's President Vladimir Putin likes to criticize America when American leaders say that they are point out that America is an exceptional nation in history. Well, it is based on history, okay? You can't point out to 5 other countries that are just like the United States. It's never existed. Just like you can't point out to 3 other empires that are similar to the Romans. You cannot. It has not existed. But yet Putin's point about Americans claiming to be unique is a bit condescending and arrogant. Yeah, but it depends on the motive behind that. On the other hand, history-wise, all I can say is Russia should be very grateful, or very happy, I guess, that the United States is and did evolve into being the country the way it has been, because it sure came in handy when they were fighting Nazi Germany in World War II. We'll be back after this commercial break.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
The concept of a new age has been around since the late 19th century, yet much of its original meaning has been lost. What exactly is the new age? Is it a religion, a collection of obscure esoteric practices, a series of doomsday predictions, or an astrological event? The New Age Chronicles is a unique, complementary publication bringing reason and grounded information to separate fact from fiction. chock full of valuable information to support you as we make the monumental shift into the new era. You won't want to miss a single innovative issue. The New Age Chronicles newspaper is coming soon to www.newagechronicles.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of Cal's Corner Radio here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show, once again, is Rob McConnell. So we were talking in the last segment about world leaders, the current G7 summit that's going on, the issue of American tariffs, where Trump's coming from, where European world leaders are coming from, etc. As we wind up this show here, let me try to summarize a few things of what's going to happen in the near future. This is something over the next couple of months. First of all, NASA, again, will continue to try to figure out how to explain the organic chemicals and molecules now that have been found on Mars. We will continue to develop very fast aircraft, especially hypersonic vehicles, which are real game changers since they travel at least 5 times that of the speed of sound. What's happening in the international trade front is the Europeans are lining up to stay united against anything that Trump does. And then, of course, you have other wild cards out there like Iran, Russia, Syria, Israel, and, of course, communist China. What's going on in Taiwan right now is a military exercise to practice defending themselves against a Chinese invasion. Now, one might say, well, that's a little bit of an overreaction because China's not going to invade Taiwan. Don't worry about it. Wrong. In fact, it would be very naive to assume that China will never invade Taiwan because China keeps threatening to do it, and they're not bluffing as far as anybody can tell. In fact, China has already announced, and their official invasion plan documents were leaked years ago to the media. China has what they call a 2020 plan, and we've talked about it on this show before. This is their plan to invade militarily the island of Taiwan and capture it. In fact, the military documents that have been leaked specifically show that the Chinese intend to invade the island at 16 different points using overwhelming force via launching around 1,000 missiles on the island to take out defensive points, as well as to soften up defenses, and then, of course, use a massive amphibious assault, one of the largest operations in the history of naval warfare. This would absolutely be one of that, to go ahead and storm the island and secure it before the United States and its allies, such as Japan and India, could respond in time to stop or deter the Chinese. And, of course, with the Chinese now having militarized these artificial islands that they have made a point to construct, they have put missiles and even bombers and military aircraft on those islands. China is, of course, lining up all of its ducks in a row to continue to do what it does best, which is be a world belligerent disguised as a peaceful nation. Now, China is also doing other things, too. China has already put in the West countless numbers of what are called Confucius Institutes. Don't be fooled by the seeming benign name of this entity. A Confucius Institute, when it exists, especially on a campus in the West, in the United States, is really an office of propaganda for the Communist Chinese. They like to use Confucius because Confucius implies a deep philosophical way of looking at things. It plays better in the marketing of this rather than saying this is just the mouthpiece of the Communist Party in Beijing, which is what it really is. And what is happening is in the United States, especially where the Chinese have the largest number of students attending schools in the Western world versus any other nation, and that is not a coincidence. What they're doing is about half of these personnel or entities are really some sort of spy that give data back to the communists in Beijing. And, of course, everyone from their relatives are intimidated and go along with this to young students who are encouraged, of course, to interact with people in the West and report back to the party on what's going on, because the communists, as far as they're concerned, cannot have enough information. So what China is doing is China is looking out for what it does best, China. That's it. And the other shoe that is part of the 2020 plan, although China calls it the 2050 plan, is to basically take over the entire world economically and become the world's only superpower by the year 2050. Now, the reason the Chinese call these plans the 2020 and 2050 plan is because that is the years that they hope to achieve these planned successes. And while they would like to take over Taiwan peacefully if they could and avoid military conflict altogether, if military conflict is necessary and proves to be needed to achieve their goal, China intends to do that. And eventually they will succeed unless the West bends over backwards to exercise eternal vigilance to stop China from being successful. Now, as far as the 2050 plan goes, that's a little bit more problematic. Now, when I say problematic, what I mean is it involves other elements. First of all, we have to look at numbers here. You know, China remains the world's most populous country. It will be surpassed in the next decade or two by India, however. But just because you have the most people doesn't mean you're the most prosperous economically. So while India's economy continues to rise, China's, of course, has at times surpassed the entire gross domestic product of the United States, and China's economy will continue to grow. It is the growth of this economy that is the greatest threat to the United States. One thing about China and other countries is if they're busy fighting a war, making money gets interfered with in that process. War is not a profitable enterprise unless one comes out being the right kind of victor at the end of it. On the other hand, one can win a war and still lose. Look at what happened in Iraq with the United States. Look what happened in Vietnam with the United States once again. So what's happening is economically, China intends to continue its long march to becoming the world's preeminent superpower. Its goal is to displace the United States so that it becomes number 2 in this world, subservient to China. And one of the reasons that China wants to achieve this milestone is that so that it can never be held back again. And it's quite logical for the Chinese to try to achieve this. Other countries would do the same if they could. This includes Russia, but it can't because its economy is much smaller. So what's happening in the different parts of the world is that you're seeing an alliance of convenience spring up as well as practical alliances so that these countries can achieve their various objectives. In the Middle East, for example, Israel has already made it clear and has now cut a deal with Russia where they both agree that Iran must not be allowed to continue to militarize Syria. Now, this does not mean that Russia is benign or peaceful in this cause. Instead, they don't want Iran to achieve any more military objectives in Syria. Instead, Russia would rather focus on their own. And, of course, they want to put theirs before Iran. So you can expect Russia to play both sides of this fence, helping Iran where it makes sense and it furthers its interests, as in Russian interests, as well as helping Israel when it also further fuels Russian interests. Russia, of course, would like to increase its foothold in Syria because, of course, it would be something that would harm the United States, which is what Russia intends to do. You have China, which wants to take control over things effectively in Asia and remain Asia's leading superpower. Its only rival would be Japan and India if India bothers getting its act together, and that's kind of questionable. China will continue to use Pakistan and North Korea as very good sock puppets to further its agenda. The wild card is this upcoming summit meeting between President Trump and the dictator of North Korea. We have no idea how that summit meeting is going to go. Trump seems to be approaching this rather low-key, which is unusual for him. What we do know is he said today that if the first meeting goes okay, then the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, will be invited for a summit meeting to come to the United States, which of course is unprecedented. But much of what Trump does is unprecedented. And speaking of Donald Trump, there are the investigations that continue to go on into him. With the Inspector General report coming out shortly, that audits the FBI's investigation of Hillary Clinton's email scandal and server scandal. Already, word has leaked out that former FBI Director James Comey, who was fired by President Trump, is not going to come out of this Inspector General report unscathed. In fact, according to leaks that have occurred so far about the impending report, assuming they are true, it appears that Comey is roundly criticized, as well as the overall investigation, and it does seem to document or prove that there were vast disagreements within the FBI over how to handle the issue of Hillary Clinton and whether there were favors, as in favoritism, shown towards her or not. One can argue that there was, because of what the FBI did not do, and some of the key players in that investigation, from McCabe to Strzok to Comey, have now suffered with their reputations because information has come out showing that there have been real problems with how these men have acted ethically while they were in positions making these decisions concerning important things like Hillary Clinton's email server. So those dynamics will continue. The investigation by special counsel or special investigator Robert Mueller will continue, but they will be winding down around the fall, not long before the next elections. And it's going to be interesting to see who comes out this time. Trump's popularity base seems to remain consistent at about 49 to 50%, although increasingly with a economy that keeps improving, it's going to be harder for the Democrats to make headway much in this election. In fact, if it were not for several Republicans retiring or Republicans doing stupid things to help the Democrats make a comeback politically, the Democrats would be out in the wilderness even more so than they are now. Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with another episode of Cal's Corner. My name is Cal Korff. I'm your host. We'll be back again next week. Thank you.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com, or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.